Alright, last year I spent a good amount of time using and testing the iPhone 14 Pro for my full review, and look, somewhat unsurprisingly, I was really impressed. Even as a hardcore Android enthusiast, it's hard to deny that there are just some things that simply work better on an iPhone. But once I switched back to using Android phones following that review, I genuinely found it quite relieving to return to the software that I know and love so well. And it's actually kind of been nice sitting on the sidelines, seeing all of these issues and bugs presenting themselves in a variety of iOS 16 updates, all the while sitting back, enjoying the comparatively stable experience that has been Android 13. But just recently, I decided that it would be fun to pop my SIM card back into the iPhone 14 Pro to see where things were at, and more importantly, to see how things have evolved since my first review. And so with that being said, here is my updated review of the iPhone 14 Pro 6 months later. First things first, right up the top here, I want to address some of the bugs that have been reported with the iPhone 14 lineup over the past few months. So to start, there have been a bunch of complaints related to the software components of the dynamic island, with it becoming misaligned or rotating to another part of the display altogether. But despite my best efforts, I've not experienced that issue once, not with the latest update and not with any previous software updates. Other users have also had issues with the phone getting overly hot depending on how they've been using it, but again, I've not had any issues with that. And then there have been some extreme reports of a few iPhone 14 Pro screens completely freezing, requiring a reboot. But as you can probably guess, I've also not had this issue. From the research I did when putting together this video, whilst yes, there were definitely issues with a number of iPhone 14 and 14 Pro units, it was, in the grand scheme of things, actually a very small number of units that had issues. And all the users I saw that were having these problems were able to get a replacement unit from Apple, no problem. So yes, whilst the headlines love to make big deals of these issues, as they do with any Android phone that has defective units, the long and short of it is don't let those reports put you off from buying an iPhone 14 Pro. The likelihood of you experiencing those issues is already very slim, particularly thanks to the most recent software updates. But then on top of that, Apple will certainly replace any defective units in the rare event that you do have issues, as they should. So those were the headlining bugs and issues that were reported over the past 6 months, but let's now talk about the issues and complaints that were a little less clickbaity. I'm talking about the issues that were far more widespread and that I actually made specific mention of in my original review. And we'll start by talking about the battery. Now, to be clear, the battery life of this phone was never bad, and in fact, I said in my original review that I still considered it to be above the competition at the time, but the big talking point was that it was noticeably worse compared to the battery life on the previous year's iPhone 13 Pro, and that was what had most of us confused. And after a number of software updates, whilst there have been some very slight improvements that I've noticed in regards to battery life, it still hasn't reached those outrageously impressive numbers that we saw with the iPhone 13 Pro. There have been 1 or 2 days of light use where I've hopped into bed with the phone sitting above 50%, but for the most part, with medium to heavy use, I've still been ending most days with around 30% of battery left. So my guess is that this slightly under par battery performance is most likely hardware related. And given we're now 6 months following the release of this phone, we're probably not going to see many more significant improvements to battery with this phone. One nice improvement that I predicted would come soon after my original review, which thankfully it did, was the inclusion of a toggle to disable the wallpaper for the always on display. And some will argue that it should have been there from the start, but you know what? I'm just happy Apple listened at all, and it's taken what was already a really solid always on display implementation and made it better. And then the cameras, and just to be clear, I actually didn't have any specific complaints with the cameras on this phone in my first review, but I did say that they were very similar to the cameras on the iPhone 13 Pro, and that images had a slightly over-processed look to them compared to past iPhones. But again, neither of those points are complaints. They're just things I pointed out. And honestly, neither of those aspects have changed. But what I have really appreciated so much since using this phone again for the last little while is how damn seamless the camera experience is. Seriously, whenever I pull this phone out of my pocket to snap a shot, I just have all the confidence in the world that it will take the photo that I want it to take, thanks purely to how fast the capture speed is. And that experience is not the case at all on any Android phone I've ever used. Even the Galaxy S23 Ultra, which I've been using and testing for the past little while as well, it is pretty fast, but even it starts slowing down after snapping a few shots, and even at its quickest, it's still not as fast as the iPhone 14 Pro's capture speed. And as someone who has 3 kids running around in every direction, capture speed is huge for me. And so whilst, yes, I do much prefer the look of the images that come out of Google Pixel phones, it is really hard to argue with the reliability on this phone of the camera snapping experience itself. All right, before we press on, I just wanted to take a moment to thank today's video sponsor, Pulseway. And if you're in IT and you're not yet using Pulseway, then you're definitely missing out. And that's because it is an IT monitoring and management platform that gives its users the power to access any system device from any location, making it super easy to address issues quickly and with minimal hassle. So with Pulseway, you can remote into any system to access files and applications. You can of course then patch any issues or run automations, or you can even just monitor CPU usage if you like. But here's the kicker, you can do all of this and more straight from your smartphone. And what's great is that it was actually built with a mobile first design. And this makes it a fantastic tool for getting work done at any time and in any location, meaning you can spend less time at the office and more time living your best life. But the best part is that you can try it completely for free, no commitments whatsoever. So to get started with using Pulseway, use the first link down in the description below. Okay, now I'm not going to spend time discussing the display, the design, or the haptics on this phone because clearly these 3 aspects have not changed one bit since I last reviewed the phone. So I highly suggest watching my first review if you are looking for details on those 3 areas, but I do want to spend a good portion of the remainder of this video chatting about software. And firstly, I've got to say, despite some thinking that it was nothing but a gimmick, I've actually really enjoyed the added functionality that comes with this dynamic island. Now, I don't use that many apps that take advantage of the live activities functionality, but whenever I see tweets or screenshots of this in action, I get super excited at that feature's potential. But I personally just find it super convenient being able to quickly open back up an active maps navigation or any music or podcasting apps that are playing audio without having to sift through my app library to do so. Once you get used to it, it can actually be so convenient. And then we have the rest of the software. Now for me, where Android used to be all about customization and fun, and iOS was more about fluidity and usability, I actually think that certain versions of Android are now just as fluid as iOS. And on top of that, I think that most versions of Android are actually now more user-friendly than iOS. Let me explain. You see, since its inception, Android has always prided itself in providing users with a proper method of navigating back. It was originally a button, but in more recent years, it's this swipe-in gesture from either the left or right of the display. Now on iOS, there is usually a bit of text provided at the top left of the screen that you can tap to navigate back, but for one, it's not always there, and it certainly doesn't look the same across different apps. But secondly, it's super hard to reach, meaning you either have to activate reachability mode to tap it, or you just have to use 2 hands. Now you can also sometimes swipe in from the left to navigate back as well, but the key word there is sometimes. This is definitely not the default action in every app, and it often takes a few really intentional swipes to even activate it, and it also often conflicts with other actions, meaning that sometimes it just straight up doesn't work at all. And then why, whenever an app is opened via another app, so let's say the shortcuts I've got set up via the Widget app, why does it feel the need to show me the original app up here on the top left? It actually looks really visually unappealing, and I just straight up don't need to see it there. Add on to that little annoyances like getting out of the emoji search menu being an almost impossible task, or the fact that it is really hard to turn off notifications for specific apps, or the fact that turning on or off auto brightness is literally hidden deep within the depths of the settings menu, or that I can't easily clear any app storage that I want. And don't get me started on how finicky it can be to select a large section of text in some apps. That seriously infuriates me. Oh, and why can't I long press an app in my app library or within the recents menu here to go straight to the app's settings? This is what I'm talking about. It's becoming harder to use an iPhone. Now, what I do love to see is that more and more apps are being released that offer pretty fantastic workarounds that allow users to create fantastic looking home screen setups. And in fact, I've just recently created this brand new home screen setup, which I've loved using over the past little while. And yes, I have also created a full in-depth tutorial showcasing all the steps involved in recreating this setup, which I'll link up in the cards. But aside from that, as I've heavily alluded to, I feel as though there's a lot of catching up that iOS needs to do to stay in line with Android as an operating system. That being said, look, a lot of credit does need to be given to Apple for amazing features like quickly removing backgrounds from subjects, or even just completely moving subjects from a photo or video to a different app altogether. And honestly, their focus mode functionality is pretty dang incredible. And I can't believe we're only just now seeing widget stacks on the latest versions of One UI, but still not stock Android. But as far as I'm concerned, these very nice to have features are fantastic, but going forward, I'd like Apple to focus on making their software just more intuitive. Now, I know I'm getting a little bit carried away. This is not an Android versus iOS video, but as an Android enthusiast, it's just hard not to notice all the little things that have made my time with the iPhone 14 Pro just that little less enjoyable. And so with all of that being said, despite all of my little complaints about how I'd like to see iOS improved, if the ultimate question is, do I think the iPhone 14 Pro is still worth picking up 6 months down the line? Then the answer is a definitive yes. That being said, if you're not desperate for an upgrade at the moment, then I would probably suggest waiting until the iPhone 15 lineup is released and then picking up one of those. But if you cannot wait and you're an avid iPhone user, then rest assured the iPhone 14 Pro is a fantastic phone that you're gonna love using. Now, I think it'll be super interesting to see how, or even if, Apple improves things in the next iteration or two of this lineup, because as mentioned throughout the video, the gap in quality between the best that Android has to offer compared to the best that Apple has to offer, it is getting smaller and smaller. Let me know if you've picked up an iPhone 14 Pro or non-Pro over the past 6 months down in the comments below, as well as how your experience with it has been. And if you're a lifelong iPhone user, then let me know what it would take for you to seriously consider switching over to Android. Aside from that, if you enjoyed the video, then a sub to the channel would be greatly appreciated. But that's it. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will catch you later.